So we're really defining the boundaries of monetary damages. And we're going to define them via the ox. The Mishnah is going to meditate on this mythical ox. We said yesterday, that an ox a bit like a car. If you ever got a job, you got a car, all kinds of damages come out via cars. And in the time of the Mishnah, if you had a job, you had an ox. And all kinds of damages come out via oxen. And so we're going to use the ox to explore the limits of damages. And the Mishnah begins. So we're now in the 10th Mishnah of the 3rd chapter. Yesh, chayav al maaseh shoro fatur al maaseh atzmo. It's possible to have a situation where you're liable for the act of your ox. You're liable if your ox damages something, but you're exempt from your own act. Ufatur al maaseh atzmo. It feels a bit like a tongue twister or a brain teaser. And the Mishnah then goes on to say, Chayav al maaseh atzmo ufatur al maaseh shoro. It could work the other way around. You can be liable for your own act while exempt from the act of your ox. So, in other words, we're just defining boundary situations. And the Mishnah is going to go through various examples where either the owner of the ox is liable, but for the damage done by an ox, but if the damage had been done by the owner personally, he wouldn't have been liable, or the other way around. And we'll flick backwards and forwards between the Mishnah and the commentaries just to try to understand what is going on. But let's start with the first example. Shoro she biesh patur vehu she biesh chayav. If his ox caused embarrassment, he's exempt. If he caused embarrassment, he's liable. So we're not talking about physical damage here. We're talking about embarrassment. Now, let's go and let's just look at the commentary. I want to look at the Bartanura. If his ox caused embarrassment, and the Bartanura brings us a verse, Dichtiv ish ba'amito velo shor ba'amito. There's a verse in Leviticus, in Vayikra, actually in the portion in the parasha of Emor, which defines the limits. It defines limits for personal responsibility. And the verse says, Ish ba'amito, a person and his fellow or his neighbor. And the Bartanura then adds, Velo shor ba'amito, and not an ox and its neighbor. And we should just look at the verse in its entirety. If a person injures his neighbor, his fellow. So here's the person. A person injures his fellow. As he has done, thus shall it be done to him. So we cause injury, we seem to receive injury, and then there's the famous words, shever tachat shever, ein tachat ein, shein tachat shein, a break for a break, an eye for an eye, or a tooth for a tooth. Just as he makes an injury on another person, so shall be made on him. And Rashi comments there, perush rabutenu sheino nitnat mum mamash ela tashlumei mamon. Our rabbis explained this doesn't mean the real injury. So when we say thus shall be done to him, we're not talking about a real injury, but we're talking about tashlumei mamon. We're talking about monetary compensation. And then Rashi obviously he's going to quote our Gemara in Bava Kama. So we're going to make monetary compensation for injury, and we'll learn later in the Mishnah there are 5 kinds of compensation for a personal injury. There's the long-term damage to the individual. There's pain. There's embarrassment. This is what we're talking about now. There's embarrassment. There's time off work. There are medical expenses. So these are the sort of categories on which we might assess damages, and embarrassment is one of them. If you knock someone over in the street and he's covered in mud, then he's embarrassed, right? That's part of the damage. But the verse says that ish kitain mumba amito, a person who injures his fellow, it's a person, not an ox. The halacha of embarrassment seems to apply to a person, not an ox. So let's go back to our Mishnah now. Shor shebiesh patur. So if the ox caused embarrassment, so it's not physical damage. We've learned separately about physical damage. If the ox caused embarrassment, it's exempt, or his owner is exempt. But if he caused embarrassment, he's liable. Let's look at another example. Let's say his ox blinded the eye of his slave. Maybe it knocked out his slave's tooth. Patur, he's free. But if he blinded the eye of his slave or knocked out his tooth, he's liable. And we have a verse explaining the halacha of the slave when a man ish et ein abdul. We're back in the Parsha Mishpatim in Exodus. These are all the classic verses of personal injury. If a person strikes the eye of his slave and destroys it, then the slave goes free. So he's liable effectively for the value of the slave. And if he knocks out a tooth, then the slave goes free. And this seems to apply to a person injuring a slave, but not an ox injuring a slave. Let's keep going. His ox injured his father or his mother. He's liable. This is really interesting. The ox is going to be liable, or the owner of the ox is going to be liable for the injury to his mother or father. And if he injured his father or mother, he's exempt. We touched on this before, that striking your mother on you or your father is you're liable to death for that. And if you're liable for death under the capital, if you are liable under the capital code, you're not liable under the monetary code. So when we say patur, he's exempt. He's exempt from monetary damage. He's not exempt from the act. And it's exactly the same in the last example which the Mishnah brings. If his ox set a sheaf, set standing corn on fire on Shabbat, he is liable. So he's liable. How could an ox do that? Well, I guess an ox could. We saw before the example of an animal dragging a piece of food from the fire that was burning and dragging it over to some corn and setting the corn alight. And in that situation, he's liable, patur. Mipnei. But if we go on, but if he set a sheaf on fire on Shabbat, patur, he's exempt. And the Mishnah explains at the end, and this explains both the example of hitting his parents and the example of lighting a fire on Shabbat, mipnei shehu nidon b'nafsho, because he is judged for his life. He's liable for his life. If you're liable for your life under the capital code, you're not liable for monetary damages. And there's a verse. These verses are all coming from the same Sedra from Mishpatim in the Torah, from the 21st chapter of Exodus. He who strikes his father or his mother shall be put to death. He's liable For his life, he's not liable for monetary damages. What about the ox? Well, he is liable for ox if the ox sets a sheaf on fire on Shabbat. But remember, we've learned already, we touched on this in the first or second chapter, I think the second chapter, that it's not normal for an animal to drag a piece of food that has a spark on it and set corn alight. So in the case of his ox setting a sheaf on fire on Shabbat, yes, he'd be liable. But he's only liable for half damages. And the Bava comments there, Chatzi nezek de mushunehu. It's half damages because it's strange. It's not a normal event for an ox to drag, or any other domestic animal to drag some piece of food with a spark in it onto corn and then set the corn alight. So, as is the principle for most damages which are unusual, which are unexpected, which the owner is not expected to guard for, particularly in all of these situations, the owner pays half damages.